we are joined by baseball writer for the Associated Press, Ronald Blum. I'm Jack Roach here with Eli Keeler. Ronald, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure that right now is especially busy for you right now, considering the news we've just got recently that the MLB lockout is over. And, just seeing how these events have transpired, what was kind of the biggest thing that the two parties between the players and the owners, they just couldn't seem to agree on?
Well, this was pretty simple. It was a fight over money, complicated by the hatred they have for each other and their differing versions of the game. The players think the game is about them. The owners think that without them, the game wouldn't exist. So it was a clash years in the making with the bitterness of the Chris Bryant grievance, the revenue sharing grievance, the shortened season grievance, the slow free agent markets, all mixed in with a rookie negotiator for the union and contempt from each side toward the other.
Yeah, that's really interesting when you have something is as big as baseball and it's just kind of a fight between money. It's I don't know, it's kind of sad from a fan's point of view to watch that go down. But moving on a little bit to some of the rules that were agreed upon. So universal DH, how do you think this affects pitchers? And I don't know for sure, but I don't think that pitchers particularly work on hitting a great deal of time. But do you think this actually increases pitchers' skill level in the future?
Yeah, for a few of them, like Jacob deGrom works on hitting. There are always a few pitchers, but for the most part, its biggest effect is it'll move a couple of veteran players who no longer have any foot speed to the National League, where they were pretty much in the American League. Some teams will use the DH spot to rotate players and bats. Others will have a David Ortiz or Nelson Cruz type in that spot. So it'll create a few high priced jobs, but that's the main impact on pitchers. Not so much. Bats get in the way for most of them, and they don't really think about it.
Just a moment ago, we were talking about Albert Pujols and how his job pool just doubled. He's 42 years old, 21 away from 700. Do you think he gets there, and is he going to be on an MLB team come April?
I think so. And obviously, with the DH going to the National League, that kind of opened up the St. Louis Cardinals as a possible destination for him. But it sounds like he wants to play one more year. And among 30 teams, I'm sure he'll find a job somewhere.
Yeah, and so with the I have a personal fascination with the MLB situation. They handle the luxury tax. Most sports leagues go with a hard cap. I personally am a fan of the hard cap. And they just signed a deal, so this won't be for several years, but do you think the hard cap is ever in the future of the MLB? And do you think that this luxury tax really, I'm pretty sure it was updated. Do you think this update of the luxury tax really affects the teams in any significant way?
Well, certainly going from 210 to 230, that frees up a lot more spending at the very top. And then the first three thresholds, just they stay the same, or the first two above. So 230 is the first threshold, then 250, then 270, and now a new fourth threshold aimed at Steve Cohn goes in there with penalties of 80, 90, and 110%. So the main worry is among some of the clubs that Steve Cohn would spend a ton of money and outspend a lot of teams who are trying to retain their players. But as far as a hard cap, I don't see it anytime soon in baseball. They fought that fight in 94, 95. The players won. And the owners are content for the soft cap of a luxury tax. And it's not worth the fight to shut down the game for months and months and maybe a year to get a hard cap.
Jack Roach and Eli Keeler here with Ronald Blum. And following up on that question, going from 210 to 230, How much does this hurt or impact some of those smaller market teams that seem to show some resistance to the increase in the luxury tax?
I don't think it hurts the small teams as much as helps the big teams because a player who's they can't afford would go somewhere. So if they can afford him at, let's pick around number 10 million, someone will bid 12 million. Now, before, there might have been a bunch of middle tier teams bidding for him, but now with the extra 20 million to spend, the Yankees, Mets, Dodgers, Cubs, Astros might get more involved for a big player or two. So what this does is directs a certain extra percentage of players to the very biggest spenders, but the people at the bottom wouldn't retain those players anywhere. Anyway, it just changes where they migrate to.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting how you say that. I want to focus a little bit on the shift here. So I've heard it defined as two players to the right of second base, two players to the left of second base. I just kind of have a question on that second place spot. How far can you push your second baseman back? How far can the shortstop come over? And how does this lack of a shift, lack of a third baseman in right field, really affect lefty hitters specifically?
Well, this is going to be for the 2023 season, nothing for this year.
Okay.
So the exact rule hasn't been developed yet. What the collective bargaining agreement does is allows this joint committee to, within 45 days notice, put in a shift rule, put in a pitch clock. So since that's going to be for 2023, this committee hasn't determined how it's going to write the rule. The one talked most about is two infielders on each side of second base. They could put in a restriction where you have to stand on the dirt. That just remains to be seen. So my guess is we won't know for sure until late summer or more likely into the fall.
Ronald, you mentioned Steve Cohen a minute ago, and I want to take it to the Bronx because we're at Fordham University. We're here in the Bronx. Now that free agency has opened up again, what can we expect to see the Yankees do in the coming weeks in terms of, improving their roster?
For the Yankees, I think we'll expect to see the Yankees get a shortstop. Brian Cashman's been pretty clear that they think Gleyber Torres' future is at second base, not at shortstop. Whether that means they go after a Correa, after a Story, we'll have to see in the next week or so. There are other solutions too. There's trade solutions. There's always a thought that with the left-handed bat, Freddie Freeman might be a possibility, but it sounds like either he's going to stay with Braves or go to Dodgers is the most likely outcome for him, but nothing's been decided yet. And the Yankees certainly have money to spend. They can now with 230, that gives them more flexibility, and they know their roster needs fixing.
Yeah, I always love to hear, stuff about my Yankees. I am a big fan of Freddie Freeman, even though it's probably not likely that he comes around. But, you never know. But kind of adding on to that, if you had to pick, probably a couple of the biggest names in free agency and your predictions on where they're going to go, maybe not including Freddie Freeman, but anybody else, what are those names for you?
Yeah, in the names, certainly you have Freeman and Correa are the two prime ones. Trevor Story is still out there. We had Andrelton Simmons finalizing the deal with the Cubs and Carlos Rodon with the Giants. Kershaw stayed with the Dodgers late last night. That has to be finalized. We'll have to see what the situation is with Michael Conforto, whether he stays with the Mets or finds a better offer somewhere else. Nick Castellanos is still out there. Those are really the big names, but there's a tier of probably 100 second line players who could help teams, like pitchers like Chris Martin. There's Zach Davies, Danny Duffy, all these people. there's so many possibilities, and everyone just hit the go button on Thursday night, then it's really hard to guess where these guys will shake out.
I'm glad that you mentioned Michael Conforto because the Mets have been very active throughout the offseason. Steve Cohen really emptying his pockets to get some big names. Do you see them being active beyond some of the guys that just, it's a matter of if they re-sign or not? Are they going to be in on some of the top names that are still out there on the market?
Well, on the very top names, I don't see it just because they have Alonso at first base. They have Lindor at shortstop, so that rules out the two big shortstops in Freeman. Uh, but they know what they need. The more pitching will certainly help. They have to make a decision on Conforto. And I would suspect the Mets will get some pretty moderate to big names before the next 10 days are out.
Yeah, I've always been a Yankee fan, but it's interesting to see what happens with the Mets as well. Following up with that, what do you think? How do you think this new 12-team playoff format, affects baseball? And do we really think? Do you like the new change, or what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I'm not greatly in favor of it. I always thought the fewer teams in the postseason, the more you prioritize the 162, but I can see the reasoning for it. I think the biggest effect will be probably lowering by 4 wins the bottom of the playoff entry. So in theory, that should lead to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 more teams not trading off people as the trade deadline approaches at the end of July and perhaps acquiring. That certainly is the intent of the reason they're doing this. Baseball doesn't want 10, 12 teams shedding players as the deadline approaches. So perhaps this knocks it down to 8 or 10.
Ronald, thank you so much for your time. I want to ask you one more while we've still got
Sure.
you. We've got some indication that the All-Star game could be decided by a home run derby instead of extra innings. Do you have any insight to give us on this? And, how exciting could this be to see a game decided by a home run derby?
Well, it also depends what time of night. If it's 12:10 a.m., I don't know how many people see it. But the reasoning is that managers have pressure on the All-Star game to pretty much use every available player, perhaps 1 or 2 who they're holding out, especially a pitcher who might be starting in 2 or 3 days hence. So by doing that, they get to the 9th inning. If they go extras, they don't have any available bodies around. And obviously they don't want to wind up in the situation they did in Milwaukee years ago, where they had to call it a tie. So I think Justin Turner may have been the first one to suggest this a few years ago. And buried on page 98 of the Memorandum of Understanding was that they would break extra inning ties in the All-Star game with this home run derby format to be determined by an agreement between MLB and the Players Association.
Ronald, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. Ronald Blum, baseball writer for the Associated Press. Again, thank you and have a good one.
You're welcome. Have a good day.